Season 14 has introduced a ton of variety into Viego's builds, and building Kraken into Tri Force into Black Cleaver isn't standard for 90% of games like it used to be. So that leaves us with the question, what should we be building on Viego? Well, I'm here to answer that question. Today I'm going to be going over all the main builds that you can possibly buy and all the variations of those builds, explaining them to you so that you guys understand what's going on with Viego. I don't normally make guide content, so if you guys really do like this video, make sure to let me know and I'll continue making some educational Viego videos as we go forward. But without further ado, let's get into the first build. The first build I want to talk about is the classic build, Kraken Slayer into Tri Force. This was a go-to build for Viego for the majority of Season 13, and is still currently the most popular 2-item combination on the patch. However, you will notice if you look that a lot of high elo Viego 1-tricks rarely run Tri Force. Why is that? Well, the answer is pretty simple. Tri Force is just a worse item this season than it was in Season 13. For one, they removed the 3-fold passive from Tri Force that was a big reason for its previous strength. And now that it isn't a mythic item, it doesn't scale nearly as well as it did with additional items. And even with all the stats that they removed from the item, it still costs the exact same that it used to. I will remind you that Tri Force is still a viable item to go on Viego, and if you're someone who struggles to adapt their build and is super comfortable with Tri Force, please continue to build it. Kraken into Tri Force into Sundered Sky is still a great build, but for me personally, I don't want to recommend an item combo that is just objectively worse than the one we were already using in Season 13, especially since, in my opinion, there are much better options. Before I continue on, I'll briefly mention that every single build I'll be talking about recommends Kraken Slayer first. Even though Blade of the Ruined King has been nerfed, people still often ask me why Kraken over Bork. The answer is simply, it's just because Kraken is more gold efficient, has better build components for tempo, and is cheaper. Statistically speaking, Kraken is miles above Bork as a first item, with there being a 4% win rate difference between the two, despite Kraken also having a higher play rate. The next build I want to talk about is my personal favorite this season, and the build that I think is the best. That build is Kraken into Eclipse. Now there are a bunch of reasons why this build is good, so I will break down each one. First, Kraken Slayer is 3,000 gold, and Eclipse is only 2,800 gold. So you're able to get one of the cheapest 2-item power spikes in the game for only 5,800 gold. If you have magical footwear, you don't even need to build boots until you have your 2 core items, just because they are so cheap. The next thing that makes this build strong is that even while it is an extremely aggressive and squishy build, Eclipse has a shield that gives you enough effective HP to still survive fights. Think of this 2-item power spike as a less risky crit build. The other best part about this build is the diversity after second item. The most common third item is Death's Dance, which I usually build, but you can go things like Maw third if they're heavy magic damage, or Sterix third if they have mixed damage with a lot of CC. Items such as Sundered Sky can be really good here if you're fed, or due to the lower HP nature of this build, you can go Lord Dominic's versus a bunch of tanks. There's so much diversity to this build, as well as it being, in my opinion, the most fun build available to Viego right now. Another build I recommended at the start of the season that I still highly recommend now is Kraken into Titanic Hydra. With Season 14, Titanic Hydra is one of the strongest items in the game. The sheer stats it gives on top of being an auto reset is enough to make it meta on tons of melee bruisers. Even though I don't run this build much personally, I still think it's a great option if you're someone who prefers to play more like a bruiser than an assassin. The Hydra build also gives you a ton of build options like Wit's End third or Sundered Sky third for more HP to pair with Hydra. Sterix, Death's Dance, and Black Cleaver all fit well with Titanic too. So when would I recommend Titanic over Eclipse? Well, like I said, it comes down to playstyle. The proper way to play Viego is to play him more like an assassin. Assassins are high risk, high reward, and the Kraken into Eclipse build fits that playstyle more. However, there is an argument to be made that building less risky, and therefore playing more safely, will yield you more benefits over the long term. So I just say test both builds and see which one feels better for you. The last main build I'll talk about is Kraken into Sundered Sky. This is a build that I almost never run, but it is quite popular with a lot of players. The idea behind this build is that Sundered Sky is extremely broken right now and gives you a ton of burst. The thing is that this build is slightly more expensive than Kraken into Eclipse, and also deals less burst damage. The main benefit of going Sundered Sky second is that you are tankier with the HP from the item and the healing from its passive. Overall, I think this build and the Kraken Eclipse build are very similar in terms of strength, but in my opinion, we're all Viego players. We should all be playing the high risk, high reward playstyle anyways. Lastly, I will discuss a few items that I get questions about often. First is Experimental Hexblade. This is probably the build that I get asked about the most because on paper, it sounds like it would fit Viego very well. Essentially, you get free stats every time you ult, including when you leave a possession. Despite this though, the item just doesn't fit into any of Viego's builds. You don't want to build it early game because there are just simply better items, and you don't want to build it late game because you generally need to start building situational, targeted defensive items as you scale. Basically, I never build this item. Next is Iceborne Gauntlet. Honestly, I think this item can be very good into full AD teams, but as a fourth item. For example, if I saw the enemy team was full AD, I would still build Kraken into Eclipse into Death's Dance, since Death's Dance is the best armor item that Viego can buy. After Death's Dance, I would build Iceborne Gauntlet because that fits into the build pretty well, rounding it out with a ton of damage and survivability. Outside of full AD teams though, I would not build Iceborne Gauntlet. Terminus is another item I get asked about a lot, and as of right now, I never build it. It's another item that on paper makes a lot of sense for Viego because of how fast you can stack Terminus, but it doesn't actually feel good in practice. Especially if you have a squishier build, it is actually more damage against tanks to just build Lord Dominic's. On top of the fact that Terminus has a terrible build path and doesn't give you much value until the item is fully stacked. As the item stands right now, I never build it. Now let's do a quick recap. Kraken into Tri Force is still a good build if you are super comfortable using it. Kraken into Eclipse is a riskier build, but is the best build to use if you're a highly skilled Viego player that understands how to utilize a more assassin playstyle. Kraken into Titanic Hydra is still extremely strong, especially if you prefer to be a bit more tanky. There's definitely less risk with this build, but also less reward. Lastly, Kraken into Sundered Sky is very viable and is akin to the Kraken Eclipse build. However, I still recommend Eclipse. Okay everyone, I hope this video helped you decide on what to build on Viego. I'm extremely grateful how many people have told me they started playing Viego because of this channel, and I am here to help guide you on your journey to becoming the Ruined One. So thank you guys for watching, hope you enjoyed, and remember, nah, I'd win.